And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 7 diadems. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, in which she is to be nourished for 1260 days. Satan thrown down to earth. Now war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon. And the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who was called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, Now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come, for the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they love not their lives even unto death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short. And when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. But the woman was given the 2 wings of the great eagle, so that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness, to the place where she is to be nourished for a time, and times, and half a time. The serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman, to sweep her away with a flood. But the earth came to the help of the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed the river that the dragon had poured from its mouth. Then the dragon became furious with the woman, and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring, on those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. And he stood on the sand of the sea. So who is the woman, who is the child, and who is the dragon? Let's actually begin with the dragon, because it told us who the dragon was. The dragon is the ancient serpent, also known as Satan, the deceiver, the accuser. This is the dragon. Now notice how Revelation 12 said that the dragon swept down 1/3 of the stars from heaven with its tail. Well, we always hear that 1/3 of the angels, the fallen angels, went with Satan. So this is even more proof that this is the dragon, also known as Satan. So if we know that the dragon was Satan, we also know who the child is, because it says that Satan, also known as the dragon, was going to devour the child as soon as it was born. So who would this be? The child would be Jesus, because it says that the child was going to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. Indeed, Jesus Christ was born into this nation. What nation? So if Satan is the dragon and Jesus is the child, then the mother has to be either 2 people, either Mary, which I don't think it is, or the nation Israel, because it talks about the offspring of the mother and how the dragon wants to defeat them and kill them. So I don't think it's talking about Mary's other sons or daughters, if she had any. It has to be talking about Israel and all of the prophets before, because Israel has produced many of the prophets. And now we move on to the dragon versus God's people. In addition to his efforts to destroy Jesus, Satan has a long history of persecuting God's people, especially members of God's church, represented by the woman in the latter portions of Revelation 12. Although there was fierce persecution from the earliest days of the New Testament church, God allowed the woman, Israel, to flee into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. The next verses then explain that the war broke out in heaven between Satan and his angels and Michael and his angels. As a result of this war, John, in the vision, saw that a place for Satan and his angels was not found for them in heaven any longer, and they were cast to the earth. So some people even say that this rebellion isn't the same rebellion that happened before the creation. So maybe this rebellion takes place way after. So prior to this event, Satan had access to God's presence to accuse his people, and we can see this in the book of Job. But now him and his angels no longer have this access and are now cast down to the earth, which is where we live, which means Satan and his angels are here. I'm going to end by saying this. Satan absolutely hates you. I mean, he's literally called the deceiver and the accuser. And the ironic thing about that is he's the one that encourages you to sin, but then once you sin, he accuses you or used to accuse you before the Father. What kind of sense does that make? He's a backstabbing friend, if that's what you want to call it. But Jesus tells us that the gates of Hades would not prevail against it, talking about the church. Now we know that the God of this age, who has blinded the minds of the unbelievers, is Satan. Paul tells us that. But the good news is that the veil is taken away in Christ.